And Bruce is going to start us off with a tech update.
Thanks. So the summer team is in place after a wonderful collection. We were 100% successful in collecting senior devices this year.
Really?
Which was a first, I believe. Certainly a lot of effort by a lot of people and the building staff helping us chase them down. But by close of business on graduation day, anyone who wanted to march had to have their device in. And so we had a good collection there. The summer team is now scrubbing all those devices and relabeling them and getting them all prepared for next year. Our shipment of MLTI devices for this year has already arrived, so we've already got those ready to go. We just received the last pieces of a firewall upgrade so that we can adjust some network priorities on the phone system so that our phone quality will increase. We're fixing to install 20 projectors in classrooms to replace broken and or old and faded, about to be broken scenarios. And we're chasing around different changes where staff are moving about and we need to move their phones and move their projectors and things like that. So we're scurrying around in summer mode and starting to get everything ready in order to be ready to go in September. I guess it's September. But other than that, that's where we're at. We're full steam summer mode.
iPads holding up?
The iPads are doing wonderfully, actually, yes.
Good.
They really are. And the demand for them for summer school was pretty high. So I still continue to see the usage grow.
Good. Good.
Would like to hit the gas pedal a little, but it's still growing.
Yeah. How'd the new keyboards do?
They did great. The thing that I think we're going to adjust for next year, though, is the crayon. Some kids just never took to it. So we're going to create a process that allows them to opt out of the crayon so that we can just take it back in stock. And maybe if we get enough of the upper grade levels, because we only did the crayon 9 through 12. And so if we get enough of them back, maybe we look at giving them to the 8th graders. But there's been some feedback from the students as we did the collection process, and we found out that really not everyone was using the crayon. So we make that adjustment. Maybe we have them to give away to a different grade level instead.
Yeah, I don't know about adult use, but like I have the crayon, which I never use, but I also have my pencil, and I only use it for certain things like highlighting text.
Sure.
Otherwise, I never use it, and it's a great tool. I just never use it.
Well, it has certain uses.
Right.
So it's not going to be as included in everything like the keyboard.
Right. Right. Okay. Staff good with their Airs? Their new MacBook? Are staff good with their new MacBook Airs?
They are, yes.
It really was an upgrade from the ones they had before. It's really definitely a huge upgrade.
We got them a larger screen and the newer processor, and absolutely.
Right.
It's
and
tough,
that battery life.
when you've got to do something like that in such a large mass, the money adds up quickly.
And you were pleased with your return payment or whatever you called it, right? That was pretty good.
So we got that check, I believe, about a month ago for $320,000, I believe it was. I don't know. I gave it to John.
You gave the check to John?
Yeah. Well, actually, we give it to Kathy, but I'll say John. But the incoming checks go to Kathy, and Kathy processes them.
He's planning a new wing for his house, and I thought, really?
Well, he promised me a new boat.
Did he? Okay, yeah.
But now I guess he's going to use it for his legal team. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, I thought that was a good amount. I mean, the way you described it long ago, maybe a year ago, is that we don't know until it's done how much we're going to get. I mean, they told us here's a probability, but we didn't know until it was done. So I was very pleased with that number. It was really good.
It was a long process, but it is to completion at this point. And it was really a great success to think that we used all that equipment for the lifespan that's expected of it and still got that much of a return on it.
Oh, it's amazing. It's nuts. It's just great.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised to even know that we could find that road to go down.
Yeah. Yep.
But
Totally
no, it worked
agree.
out well, and I envision that we'll be using that road again someday.
Okay. Yeah, good. Well, I think that because I'm an old timer, you know, the old white MacBooks were obviously great when King started the program up, but at some point we realized they were quite expensive. Keys popping off and other problems
Moving
happening,
parts.
and
They had moving parts.
moving parts, right? And the iPads or any tablet like it, obviously, are just one heck of a great deal for school districts comparatively. So, no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
Brad,
and our damage has shown that change as well, because you know, we don't have hinges that are being overextended when somebody opens the lid, or
Right.
somebody sits down on a laptop that's already open and things like that. You know, the iPad is a lot more durable, and
Yep.
there's no moving parts.
Yep.
I'd
Did
say
you see
probably,
where-
you know, we still get our cracked screens because they do have a tendency to fall from a distance or a height, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
But other than that, no, they do fairly well.
good. Did you see where the MagSafe connectors are back?
I saw that they're coming back, but you know, unfortunately for us, it's going to take a whole different revolution in equipment before we achieve that again.
Yeah, and I was just making the point that, Brad, what happened was Governor King in the late 90s started the laptop program. And with students using them, like they would break the power connection to the laptop. And so Apple created, I don't know if it's because of Maine or other states
It
or
was
whatever.
because of Maine.
It was because of Maine.
Absolutely because of MagSafe was developed because of Apple's test program with students in the state of Maine.
There we go. So MagSafe is that kind of connector that just disconnects as soon as you touch it wrong. If you run into the cable, it just disconnects it instead of ripping out or pulling the MacBook to the floor. So that's our claim to fame, and we're sticking with it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We could achieve that now through adapters, but you'd have to plug in a receiver in the bottom end of your device and then plug in another end on the other end of your power cord, and it would still break through a magnetic connection, but it still leaves awkward connections hanging out the end. And so I don't know how much of a fan I am in that regard.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, other than that, I think that's all I got, Steph.
All right.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, and I'm just going to do a data overview. I think we'll mostly stick to district level. I'll drill down to just show you a couple of school-based pieces. I want to go over the NUIA data, which NUIA is, there's an assessment in reading, language usage, and math, and it's given at the beginning of the year, required now by the state. It's our new MEA, and then given again the second half of the year. I will be very upfront that we missed assessing a very large portion of our high school students. We're required through the MEA to test 95% of our student population. We usually get pretty darn close to that. Sometimes we might dip down to 92% if there's a significant number of absences. High school, we had 19% that didn't finish that didn't take the math assessment. And then the percentage grows from there for the language usage and the reading assessment. So we're not going to be near our 95% for the high school. Basically, the fallout from that is really just that when we submit our ESEA grants, we have to provide the rationale for why that was. And I guess in a nutshell, we thought that we had a system in place, and there were multiple places within that system where there was failure, either to communicate or to execute the task. So we're aware of what those issues are, and definitely will do better going forward.
Not COVID related?
Well, I would I would like to say it's not COVID related, but there's also times when there's childcare absences and, other, a sickness. And sometimes when there's those absences, and we did have a teacher that was absent and had a sub in the classroom, that communication, there's a breakdown. So although I would like to say it's not COVID related, everything seems to be COVID related.
Yeah.
So I think that played a role. That's certainly not the only thing that played a role. There is some communication breakdown that should not have happened.
And when are this testing times again?
So the window for the spring was the full month of May and the first 2 weeks of June. So it's a 6-week window. Sometimes what can happen though, is it's so much time that it's like, oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. And, sometimes things don't happen. So we also did a science assessment. I don't have the data for the science assessment. We have much better numbers for that. It's typically a 2-week window for the science assessment, but they extended it for us for 4 because I think the state recognized that even in the spring, we're still experiencing enough cases that you've got a handful of kids that are out for COVID related absences and have to be out for 5 days or more in some cases. It makes it tricky to get all the assessing done.
And when's the testing range in the fall?
They usually they'll be providing us the date soon. So I don't know exactly what it is for the upcoming.
No, last year.
fall.
Last year.
Usually, I think they gave us 6 weeks as well. And it was the start of October through the first 2 weeks in November.
Okay. And I'm asking these questions because I've never been able to remember the testing stuff. It doesn't go into my head. So what grades again do we do the NUIAs?
So you will see data from grade 2 all the way up through grade 11. Grade 2, we're not required to give the language usage, although they did, with the exception of Ashpoint. Ashpoint didn't give the language usage assessment to grade 2 in the fall, but they did in the spring. But you're just going to see that as a little gap in the data. We're not required to give the language usage in grades 9 and grade 10. We're actually not required to give the NUIA in those 2 grades, but we have as a district, we've used this assessment for many years. So, and we used it for many years prior to me making the cohort data sheet that I'm going to show you. But the nice thing about the cohort sheet is you can see trends for that particular class over time. So one of the things I'm able to do is if there's a decrease in the class data or the class average, then I can look over time and I can see, is that significantly lower than where they have been in the past? Or maybe it's lower from the fall, but maybe the fall was a little bit more of a higher anomaly, but in the past, it's still higher than maybe how that class is done on average when we look back. So I'll walk you through that piece. So 9th and 10th grade, again, not required to take language usage, so they didn't, but we asked them to do the reading and the math assessment just so that we can keep all of our data straight. The state now pays for the assessment with the exception of grade 2 and grade 9. So what used to be like a $12,000 to $13,000 cost is now a $2,000 to $3,000 cost.
Good.
So that's nice. And it's nice to have the data.
Do we do any other assessments now besides NUIA?
Yes.
Okay.
Not as much for the high school, but we have significantly more assessments for K through 5, and that's primarily just to help support the RTI process. And the new, I'll show you some of our math data for K5, but the math program that we've implemented in K through 5 and then we'll be adopting and implementing this year for 6 through 8 has a math assessment that's very, very similar to NUIA. So that's a little bit of a downside. I did ask that that K5 staff give that assessment first, because that's now the more important data point for us, because the program will recalculate so that when we run a prerequisite report, we can help to meet the needs of students. Our instruction is based directly off of that assessment. NUIA, our goals, our instructional goals are tied to NUIA because it links to the Common Core, but our instruction doesn't come from NUIA. So it's a little bit different, but we do have those additional layers of assessment, especially in K-5. But next year, the math assessment, it's called a diagnostic, is required 3 times per year through the Ready Classroom curriculum. And so there is that additional math assessment, which is quite similar to the NUIA assessment.
So all of that is our choice. The NUIA is the state choice for us to do, and we do it in addition with 2 other grades in addition, or 3, no, 2. Anything else we're assessing on a regular basis that if I can remember it, that would be great in my head.
K-5, we also do a reading assessment just to figure out the reading level of all of the students.
What program is that from?
We use a reading assessment called Fontes and Pinnell, but that's varied over the years. It used to be DRA, or one side of the district used Fontes and Pinnell, another used DRA. We're now all using Fontes and Pinnell so that we're consistent as a district, but we're also questioning, some of the validity of that data as we're looking ahead at this new Bookworms program, which also comes with assessments. So that piece is a little bit more fluid, and we're trying to figure out what's really going to be best so that we can streamline, because we don't want to overassess the kids either. And we certainly don't want to be giving them assessments with data that we don't need or use.
Yep. Okay. And that's it. All of that is it.
Yep.
And are they completely fluently happening on the iPads?
Yes.
In other words, no glitches. No, it's like just
I don't
for the
think
kids,
so,
it's just
Bruce.
seamless. It's just beautiful, buttery smooth.
So one of the things that did come up again during testing is the impact it has on our network. So the iPads certainly are a little more chatty in the background of the network during a testing, like the NUIA testing.
Interesting.
Back when we had the MacBooks, or the iBooks, I guess, the NUIA application would have 50 files open at the same time that were constantly syncing with the cloud. And so we always tried to only test 2 classrooms maximum per building at any given time in order to make sure that, we didn't bottleneck things.
Yeah.
And initially when the iPads started, that really relaxed quite a bit. But this year, I don't know what's changed. We're trying to still look into it. But this year, that's what affected our phone system. We had a lot of bad phone calls because our VoIP network was being heavily bombarded through the testing process. And since the iPad became the testing device, we've not had any restrictions for the number of concurrent tests occurring per building. And it's just been fine for a great number of years, actually. But this spring, when we were in testing, we did notice that. And so we're trying to make some adjustments on the network so that we can indicate that all the phone packets have a priority over any other data on the network. But no, the iPads have done well through it. There's always a problem on the other end that occurs where somebody's test doesn't let them in because we have to call the company and they got to click a checkbox somewhere type thing on their end type. But for the things that are under our control, it goes remarkably well.
Is NUIA an app or it's through Safari?
Well, yes and no. So it's not really an app. It's what we call a web clip. So it is still using a browser, but their app is the browser because it's a browser that allows the device to be locked into kiosk mode. And so, it prevents them from changing the screen and things like that. So it is still a web-based product, but it's their web-based product.
Gotcha.
And so for the most part, all of that configuration and authorization piece per exam or per assessment really occurs on their end. And so for the most part, the glitches are just more, one person changed classes and now they're being tested here, but that synchronization didn't catch up with them on their end. And so it doesn't enable the test for them at this point. Just a little bit of massaging. But other than that, I mean, that's what's to be expected. It's the nature of it.
Fine. It's just like, back before, whenever before used to be, there were like students who like, I can't do it. It's freezing. I don't know, so that's way in the history, right?
Well, I mean, no different than when we used to color in the circle with the number 2 pencil.
Yeah.
I have a sheet here for everyone, but gee, Johnny, I don't have one with your name on it. It's no different.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay. Cool.
NUIA company did experience a glitch. It was nothing we could control on our end. They had an issue with students that needed the accommodation of text to speech. And if your device had been, if you had, what's it called, Bruce? You get the newest upgrade, update. If you had done
the version of iOS.
Yeah. And I think that came out in January. And they usually say, like, don't do an update before the assessment. Well, it wasn't like we clicked it the week before the assessment. It was in January, and it wasn't compatible with the assessment and that text to speech feature. The state was well aware of that. The company was aware of that. They were able to fix it within a week or two. And we had a 6-week window, so it wasn't detrimental, but that always gets people a little riled up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But those are just the normal things that you encounter. I wouldn't necessarily say so much that NUIA is at fault or anyone's at fault. That's just the nature of the beast, as you're trying to get so many different people to align in a certain way in order to achieve this. It's just, you're going to have percentages in every category.
Yeah.
Okay.
So NUIA and the Ready Classroom assessment are both called CATs or CATs, which is a computer adaptive test. And that just means that as students work through it, if they get the first question right, the next one is a little bit harder. If they get the first question wrong, the next one is a little bit easier. And it keeps leveling them until they're at a point where they're getting 50% of the questions right and 50% of the questions wrong. And then they ultimately get their level. So one of the things that we look for with NUIA is what percentage of our students are performing at the average level or higher. And the average is sort of a funky percentage. It's the 41st percentile or higher. And part of that is because it takes the standard deviation into account. The student gets a RIT score that's at a percentile, but that RIT score is usually within a standard deviation range of anywhere between 5 to sometimes 16. So they just take an average of that and they look at the 41st percentile or higher. 41st percentile starts the range of students who score in the average range. And then there's the high average range, and then there's the high range. And then of course we do have students that score in the low average range and the low range. So I'm going to show you our cohort data. This does not have any fancy graphs on it because I use this data to try to look across, like I said, and take averages, but I do have some fancy tables that I can show you as well. So this takes all of our data. There's a little note up here that mentions every percentage here is the percentage of students in that grade level that have scored at the 41st percentile or higher. So for example, 11th grade, of the students who completed the assessment in 11th grade for math, 57% of those students were scored in the average range or higher. And then we can look over time. So the black score means that they improved over what the average score was in the fall. And then we can look over time. So 57% of that class, when that same group took the winter NUIAs and completed that assessment, it was about the same percentage of students that were at average or higher. Over time, There was a point when that group was 70% of them were average or higher, and 66% of them were average or higher. So this number is a little low. Again, even though it's higher than where they were scoring in the fall, there was a pretty big dip in the fall. So that's why it's important to look at this over time, because otherwise it looks like, whoa, what a win. We went from 48% up to 57%, but that's a little deceiving because that number has been dipping for a little bit. So the red score just means that it's a dip from the previous score. Again, reading, where they're more on a downward slant there for the 11th grade assessments. Language usage, you're not going to see much for historical scores there because that was only required starting this fall. So you'll only see, for the most part, fall 2021 scores to spring 2022 scores. And then, as I mentioned, 10th grade did not do the language usage assessment. It's not required for the MEA, and we don't require that as a district. And then same for grade 9. And then grade 2, we didn't have district-wide data, but I was able to break that out if schools, for the schools that did give the assessment. I think it was just Ash Point that didn't assess their second graders in the fall, and it wasn't required. So when I look through this data, and again, you'll see the class here, you've got the grade levels, and then the color just indicates which assessment it was. There are certainly some areas that make me excited, even though there's a lot of red here. And strangely, we have seen a trend over time that our fall data is sometimes higher than our spring data. And I don't know if that's testing fatigue. Sometimes I usually try to tell administrators, try to plan the test for a rainy week, make sure nobody's mowing the lawns, like there's no fresh cut grass smell, because some of those factors, it puts kids in summer brain mode. So
Interesting.
I always take the spring assessment data with a little bit of a grain of salt, but some nice silver linings here. Grade 5, we have 54% of our students who are average or higher in math, so 41st percentile or higher, which isn't a change from the fall. But if you look over time, there's no dip here. And in fact, there were in the fall of 2020, which was the first time that those students were coming back to school after the emergency remote learning, only 42% of students were in the average or higher. They brought that up by winter. Again, there was a little dip in the spring. Our winter data looked like, well, we're making all sorts of growth. And spring of 2022 data was a little more disappointing, but again, sometimes we see that trend. But this class is seeing that bump and that improvement, and there was some significant growth in 5th grade, which we're really proud of. I attribute that obviously to the hard work of the teachers and their work on the implementation of the new math program. I think we're definitely seeing results, and I'll show you some of the K-5 specific data there as well. But again, we see things like 4th grade math, 48% is pretty low when you look across the board. We tend to be in more around the 60th percentile on average. So 48% is a pretty significant dip. But if you'll remember back to any time I've talked about red flag grade levels, this is the class. This is the cohort that we've seen the most academic issues with as a result of COVID, when we're just looking at the data. So these students were in 2nd grade when we went to emergency learning, and this isn't unique to our district. I've looked at lots of studies. There's something about this grade level, and I think probably for math specifically, that end of 2nd grade expectation of where students should be is pretty significant, because they jump from there to multiplication, division, multi-digit addition, and multi-digit subtraction as they move into 3rd grade. So if they don't have that strong foundation in 2nd grade, it's a struggle as they continue through. So this 48%, although it's low, I'm really proud of this number, because sometimes those numbers go low and they're hard to bring back up. But again, I attribute this to good instruction and good programming. So this class in the fall of 2020, 38% of students were in the 41st percentile and above. And you can see there was a little increase. Spring data dipped back down. And we were at the same place in the fall with 43%, but now we're dipping, we're increasing again. So that's definitely promising to see some of these silver linings here. Any questions about this report? And I can send this to you if you want to spend some time with it.
It's absolutely fascinating and not surprising about that cohort, and that it would be nationally, right? Just wow. And in terms of milestones and how you describe it, yeah, wow.
Yeah, an observation. I think 8-year-olds go through a huge developmental leap. Whenever I was working with teams of multi-grade classrooms, it was always hardest to take a 3rd grade classroom and either put them with a 4th grader or a 2nd grader, because they go through so much developmental. So it doesn't surprise me that, you know, if they in that cohort that they were most impacted by COVID and the pandemic. I do have a follow-up question. How many days approximately do our students spend in tests per year on average? I mean, maybe it varies per grade level, but you know, I just want to make sure that we're balancing the importance of this data with, you know, every time that the student is going through a test, that it's less instructional time. And I just want to make sure that we're getting that mix right. The data that we're getting is all necessary, and also that we're maximizing the instructional time for every student that we have in our district.
So measuring it in days is tricky. The NUIA assessment takes students typically, some are fast and still do well even though they're fast. So we've seen it completed accurately in as little as 30 minutes. Probably more of an average is 45 to 50 minutes. And then we do have students that take the longer end and could be up to an hour and a half. It is not timed. So we make whatever time available for students to be able to finish. So there are times when a teacher gives an allocated amount of time, and if the student isn't finished, they pick up where they left off the next day. So for the most part, unless it's a group like grade 5, 8, or 11 that also takes the science assessment, it's typically 3 assessments in the fall and 3 assessments in the spring. We try not to give all the assessments in one day. Usually they're 1 per day. So, you know, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. Okay. Each day and usually it's 3 consecutive days, but the schedule doesn't always work out that way.
Okay, so it's not overbearing, or you're not getting feedback from either parents or from teachers that it's too much testing for these students?
I think probably the too much testing is that we have a math assessment that's very similar to the NUIA math assessment. And I think if NUIA was not a required MEA, we could take a look at that and say, maybe we don't need the NUIA data now that we have an assessment that does the same type of thing and it's specifically connected to our instruction. But because it's now required as the MEA, I don't know that there's any way that we could eliminate that. But I think in the math scores, when I looked through our NUIA data for K5 and compared it to our math diagnostic Iready data, the Iready data, even though it's the same type of an assessment, actually looked better for the most part than the NUIA data. It's not that the NUIA data looked bad. It just, I don't know that it was quite as representative, because I think most teachers gave the math Iready diagnostic assessment first, because that's what they were encouraged to do. And I think test fatigue, you're a student and you're like, why am I doing a math assessment like this again? I already did this. So that's challenging.
Thank you.
At the bottom here, so this is district-wide data. And of course, we only have 1 11th grade, 1 10th grade, 1 9th grade, and 1 grade each for middle school. But we have multiple schools that have 5th grade, 4th grade, so forth and so on. So I did break it out by school as well, because I encourage our principals, as they're thinking about their school-based objectives, to really think about what their needs are. because the data is going to show you our schools are not all the same. They do not all have the same needs, maybe with the exception of that 4th grade. But interestingly, you can see that 4th grade group at Ash Point, they've actually done quite well. They had in the fall of 2019, so pre-COVID, that cohort was 74% of them were in the 41st percentile or higher, or average or higher. There was a dip with that group after emergency learning. That dip came up in the winter, but again, we sort of had that a little bit of a downward slide with spring NUIA, although they still were doing better than the fall assessment. Little bit of a summer slide there from the spring assessment to the fall, but they've brought that score back up again. So we went from pre-COVID 7, and this would have been when they were 2nd graders, the beginning of their 2nd grade year, 74% of those students at the 41st percentile or higher were down to the 61% of them, but improvement since COVID. And that's our biggest red flag group. The other thing that principals can do here is they can take a look at this data over time also. So if they're thinking, gosh, is going from 86% to down to 77% really a pretty big dip? It looks like a big dip in reading. But when we look at that data over time, there's definitely been a fluctuation in that group. So those are important things to dig into. What's happening that year, or what's happening in the fall versus what we're seeing, and which students are growing and which ones aren't. So we actually can drill into that data. I'll show you the growth charts as well. But we have something called a quadrant report, and we can see in the top 2 quadrants, we have students who are making high growth and they're high performing students. So that's really exciting. And then students who are making high growth, even though they're low performing students. And that's exciting because we want to make sure that we're seeing that high growth. So we always want to see kids in the top part of our quadrant report. The bottom quadrant report is low growth, even though they're high achieving students, and low growth and they're low achieving students. We don't want to see students in the bottom part of that chart. But what that allows us to do is think about, are there kids that we're not moving the needle on, and why? So we can drill down, and we can do the same with our Iready data as well. They just added quadrant reports to theirs. I think they're competing with NUIA, by the way. So again, I've got this for each school. There's areas of concern here. When you look at our data district-wide and you look at those averages, there are some schools that are seeing a large percentage of students that are in, again, the 41st percentile or higher. And then we do have schools where there's a small percent of students. So 2nd grade at Cushing is one of those areas. And this data just, again, allows principals, teachers to really think about, okay, what's happening here? How can we make sure that we're getting these students and this group the support that they need?
It also helps us understand sort of whole life data.
Yeah.
I mean, because kids learning is half at school and half at home,
Right.
So we get whole life data in this too.
Yeah. And what's nice about the quadrant report is you see them all as little dots, but you can hover over the dot and you can see exactly who that student is. And then you can think about, okay, what might be going on? And
Yeah, good. Nice.
So you can really drill down into the data. So I'm going to jump over to, this is our NUIA growth. I promised you some charts. So obviously we want our students to be proficient. We want those numbers that I just showed you in the chart to be as high as we can get them. I would like them all to be 85% or higher. Again, on average, we're close to about 60%. But this is also really important to consider. This is the student growth. So you might have a student who is nowhere near the 41st percentile. They're in the low. And so their score in the fall they're not even on that chart of the students that are in average, high, average, or high. but maybe they've gone from low to low average and they've made a significant amount of growth. And we want to capture that as well, because that's really important. That's the first step, is making sure that our instruction is allowing students to show growth. So this chart shows, this is by grade level. In math, our percentage of growth by grade level. And what's really interesting here, 4th grade, again, that's the really concerning sort of red flag group. 2nd grade is also becoming our red flag group. And I've looked nationally at that data as well. Those students missed the end part of their kindergarten during remote learning. And ironically, I have a 2nd grader and a 4th grader. So, but that is another area that mathematically we're a little concerned about that group as well, as they continue to come up through. That grade 4 here, 80% of the students that took the assessment in both the fall and the spring, we needed both of those scores. 80% of those students showed growth, and growth not just meaning like 1 point on their RIT score. They had to meet their growth goal by the norms that NUIA considers showing growth based on 30 weeks of instruction. So that's pretty exciting to see that 80% of our students met or exceeded their growth goal. So there's definitely some great learning happening there, even though, again, that number of 48% at the 41st percentile or higher looks low. So this shows our growth over time for the admin team, and I didn't pull it up today, but I do have a record every year of what our growth looks like. Our growth this year is on par with what we were seeing pre-COVID. So students are getting instruction that they need, they're making growth. We still want to try to get those proficiency scores higher, but we're pretty pleased with the growth that we're seeing overall. Again, there's a couple little glitches that we see here, but I'm not totally reliant that our 11th grade data is truly representative of our whole group, because we weren't quite at that percentage of students tested that I would like to see either. I have this all by school as well, so that we can see specific schools. Again, if there's areas where maybe a group of a grade level isn't making the growth that we might want to see, what might be happening there. 5th grade reading at Cushing is an area that we would want to drill into. Again, we're going to be piloting a new reading program, so we'll be paying close attention to how that affects our growth data. South School. And then Thomaston Grammar School. I really like to see these scores around 70% growth or higher. So on average, that's where we tend to be. So the ones that go a little bit below that, we try to pay close attention to, you know, what's happening there and how can we target. And I'll share a really quick story about how this data and conversations about our objectives are helping to change how administrators are thinking about their objectives. Because Thomaston Grammar School noticed with their students that were entering into 2nd grade, they were 1st graders last year, that they really were going to need some additional support, particularly in reading. So they thought about, what resources do we need? What training do we need? How can we do some teacher collaboration and peer teaching? So teaching with another teacher, co-teaching. How can we use that model to really support students? And their objective helped to focus on that, and specifically in literacy. And you can see that effort is paying off. It's sort of like giving teachers the opportunity to do some action research, try some things out, and then see how does that move the dial on the data. So those objectives have been really exciting to hear about. And I think, again, this data is useful in helping to not just look at our data overall, but what are some specific areas that we can see that might be a need for each school, because each school is definitely different. Any questions about growth or any of the NUIA data?
Sort of a connected question, Stephanie. And there's certain areas in certain schools that it seems to be, really thriving. And I'm wondering if there's communication between that school and other schools that might be struggling in that area in terms of strategies. I know every school's population is slightly different and teachers are different, but I'm just wondering if there are, how much communication there is for the successful schools to communicate with the schools that might be struggling in certain areas.
Well, I will be totally honest with you. We came up with a lovely model for that, which I shared with the school board at the last time that I did a report. We came up with an idea to use the second faculty meeting of each month for K-5 to design an opportunity to do grade level meetings. And we did that in math. We wanted teachers to have the opportunity to talk about pacing and make sure that our trimester language all aligned, and they completed that task. And we asked them, getting together in grade levels, we used to do pullouts. Lauren, you probably remember that. We would get subs and pay for subs, and staff would come here at central office and be with me for a full day. We really can't do that anymore. We don't have the subs, and I really don't feel right about pulling teachers out of their classroom for that with all of the absences that have been COVID related. So teachers actually said that they really liked that model of it was an hour after school using a second faculty meeting. So we were hoping to replicate that, but with the change in the contract, there is no longer a second faculty meeting for K-5. So that's going to be very tricky. It's really important for grade levels to get together. So we're just going to have to find a way to either establish an MOU or get super creative. Any other questions?
So that's a concern. Some things you don't realize happening when they happen.
Well, I'll jump into the ready math because this is exciting.
Let me just quickly say that I love what you're tracking for NUIA. I love the grades we're doing it in. I think the data, I appreciate what you said about Brad about testing, but if it's not onerous, it's really good for us to be able to track and see. It's great that teachers can also see from their own experiences with their students, but also in testing, where they're at. So I think it's just vital for us district to be able to track grades and classes as they go through and how they're doing and interventions when necessary, et cetera.
Yeah,
totally agree, Lauren. I also think that it's what we do with the data, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we use it to actually improve instruction or to improve learning in some way?
Right.
So I think one of the low-hanging fruit is often peer-to-peer, teacher-to-teacher coaching or sharing techniques or sharing what works and what doesn't. And I just hope that we as a district can work toward having that time back so that can happen more, so that the teachers who are doing really successfully, and students are doing really successfully on these tests can share some of their collective wisdom with teachers who might be less successful. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what's feasible given where we are with the contract and what we can ask teachers to do, but I do think it's something we should keep in the back of our minds somehow and take advantage of if we can come up with any creative solutions to do that more.
Yes.
I agree. I thought we had a creative solution. So to lose that time is very challenging, especially in my role. But we will work something out. We are resilient, like Lauren likes to say. So we're going to figure something out. And I completely agree, Brad, that time is really valuable to teachers, and they tell me that all the time. And it was a big loss not to be able to do pullouts with subs. I think everybody recognized why we couldn't do that when COVID was going on. We couldn't get teachers together in a room and, be sharing germs, but we'll definitely figure something else out. And I think it's probably going to be through technology if we can make that happen. So the final piece that I want to show you is our Iready data. What I love about this is it is actionable data. So each teacher can go in, they can see their own classrooms, distribution of data. They can drill down to the individual student, see whether or not they're making growth. And then they can run what's called a prerequisite report and see which specific skills students need for the upcoming lesson, not just the unit, but they can do that for every single lesson, which is amazing. So you don't just have your students that are maybe in the green and considered high average, so they're always getting the more challenging work because maybe they did really well in the geometry portion of the assessment, but they maybe need more support in the fractions portion of instruction if they're in 4th or 5th grade, or numbers base 10. So it takes all of that into account, and it keeps regrouping kids based on what their needs are, and it provides the instruction to get students to the essential skill. So it's not just backfilling with, you need more fluency in addition or subtraction, because that's not always what kids need. It's how do you get them to the essential skill that's part of that instruction so that they can move ahead with their peers. So this is what we saw as a district K through 5, from the fall assessment to the spring assessment. And this is the part that I am the most excited about. And I'm a strong believer in the program. Obviously, it is the teachers that are passionate about using the program, and they're the ones that make it work. But because of that, we're seeing results. So we had 24% of our students were 2 grade levels or below based on the fall assessment. 8% were 3 or more grade levels below. By the spring assessment, only 10% of those students of the students across the district were 2 grades or more below in the spring assessment. So that's really exciting to see this level of growth and their placements. Again, the green only had 8% that were ready for that learning at the beginning of the year. Although I will add that even if they're 1 grade level below, that means they've mastered the previous year's content. They're just not, they don't have any of the current year's content. So second grader might very well be in this yellow 60% when they first go into 3rd grade. So that's pretty normal. But to see the amount that this grew by the end of the year, we have almost 50% of our students on grade level is really exciting.
Yeah, to go from 8% to 49% is remarkable.
Yeah, that's exciting. And that's definitely what you want to see. You want to see this, you'll expect to see the yellow in the fall, because again, the students are probably have not, if they're a 2nd grader, they're likely not to have learned the 3rd grade content yet. But you want to see the green grow and you want to see the red reduce. And that's exactly what we saw. So that was very exciting. That information is also provided to us based on each grade level, so we can see how much each grade level grew. Kindergarten is astounding. To see this is really amazing. They're not going to have red because you're not going to have anybody that's 2 or more grade levels below. So you really want to see lots of green in the spring in kindergarten, and that's exactly what we're seeing. The 2nd grade, again, there's a lower percentage of students in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade in the green. We knew that 4th grade was more of a red flag. 2nd grade, there's some pockets. It's not as much across the district, so our district data doesn't show it as much, but there's pockets at each school that the 2nd grade spring data is a little bit more concerning. And 4th grade, you can tell from the fall, that was the most concerning, and there's definitely growth happening there. So overall, we were pretty pleased with how the spring data looked. I'll show you one more comparison, because you might be wondering, how do we compare on a national level? Is this normal what we're seeing? So
just a quick question on that last one, Stephanie. Sorry to interrupt. Do we track students who have been in our pre-K program to see how they fare once they enter kindergarten? Because I think that would be interesting data to know, like, if you go to pre-K, you might be more likely to be in the green than the yellow, or, I mean, I just want to try to encourage pre-K enrollment in our district, because I'm a firm believer in early childhood education, and I really believe that it can make a big difference for students, not just in kindergarten, but all the way through as we're tracking their test results.
Yeah. I don't have recent data, but I do have two beautiful charts from the past that I put together because I was curious about that as well. And Joseph helped me to run the data to see in both math and reading, is there a difference for our students that have been in pre-K versus not in pre-K? And there absolutely is a difference in both math and in reading. So I would be happy to share this data with you or with the group at some point. I want to go through it so I remember it a little bit better and just refresh my memory with the analysis of this. But our findings were that there was a significant difference for the students that have attended pre-K.
Great.
I think you want to.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
I think you want to share that with the board in a business meeting in your report as a graph, a simple graph.
Yeah. Most
simplistic, whatever graph, because that's really important for everybody to see, to continue to know why we do pre-K and that it is really helpful.
Yeah, and along the same lines, I would love to be yelling that from the rooftops, honestly, to see if we can really encourage parents to enroll their children as a pre-K student in our district, because I really believe it makes a huge difference to get students used to being in school and get them really on the right track going forward. The more we can do that, I think the more success we're going to have. K through 12.
The issue there, though, is not that parents aren't enrolling. It's that Penquist can't staff their programs.
Mm.
That's the problem. We can staff our program. So the question is, should this continue? Do we want to think about reverting to all RSU13 fully funded programs where we can actually hire teachers and ed techs and enroll those kids? Because Penquist has a problem. They don't pay their staff enough. So therefore they have a hiring problem, and that's going to become more and more of an issue I see going forward. So we have plenty of parents that want to enroll kids. The classroom's open enough to do it.
I 100% agree with it. If we can afford to bring it all back to RSU13, I 100% support that for exactly the issues you just mentioned. Yeah.
I think it's worth looking at in the next budget cycle just to see if we can't transition away from that, because if that partnership is no longer of real benefit to us, I don't see why we would continue it personally. So anyway,
follow your lead on that. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yep.
Yeah. I'll see if I can work with Joseph to get this data updated. It's from, I followed 2017, 2018 data, 2018 to 2019 and 2019 to 2020. So nothing post-COVID. I think I put this together and we were going to present a report at some point before COVID happened. And I just don't think we ended up ever getting to it. But we also broke the data down by percentage, by students receiving free and reduced, or students who would be considered economically disadvantaged, and compared economically disadvantaged students who had pre-K versus economically disadvantaged students who didn't have pre-K, non-economically disadvantaged students who had pre-K versus non-economically disadvantaged students who didn't have pre-K. And I think in multiple scenarios, pre-K was, in both groups, pre-K had major advantages. So I'll see if we can pull something more recent together so we're not using old data. But the old data did look, it does make a difference. I think it's pretty clear. All right, I'm going to jump down to this last graphic that I wanted to show you, because again, if the question is, how do we compare in our district to national data? This is the national norm pre-COVID, so spring of 18-19. This is the national norm post-COVID. So taking all the data of every student that has that completes the assessment, this is where all of the averages fall. And this is our district data. So for students who are in the mid or early on grade level, it's pretty comparable nationally. And then for students who are 2 or more grade levels below, we actually are a little bit closer to the national norm pre-COVID versus the national norm today. So I think that that's pretty exciting. It does make us as a K-5, when I met with the K-5 administrators and went over this a little bit more in depth, they were saying, how do we reach these kids that are in the yellow? Because it seems like we're making improvements here for our kids that are 2 or 3 grades below level. You saw from fall to spring that there was a decrease in that number. How do we reach these kids that aren't way at the top and aren't way at the bottom? What are we really putting into place for those kids? So I think overall, I'm very pleased with the math implementation in K-5. I'm really looking forward to the 6 through 8 implementation and seeing where we go from there.
Yeah, that is really fascinating data, not only how we compare, but also COVID effect. Look at that, look at that COVID effect. Yep, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Huh. All right, that's great stuff, Stephanie, great stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just ask a long-term question at the end of this discussion of assessment, and that is, should we or can we aspire to collecting this kind of data on social emotional learning? Well, this is great data on academic learning, and it's year by year, and it's standardized, and it makes sense, and you know, it's a bigger question about doing this for social emotional learning in the future. I don't think the state has anything, right? They don't have anything like NUIA type thing for.
There are lots of tools. We had a committee that explored several tools. There's one that aligns specifically with CASEL. We actually have one. We don't like it, but we've had it, we've tried it, we've piloted.
Yeah.
The data, it's tricky, I think, to get from the data what we need.
Yeah.
And there's always that level of subjectivity. So the assessment that we have is in our FastBridge suite, and it's called the SABRS assessment. And it's the students do a self-assessment, and then the teachers do an assessment on students. And it has academic, behavioral, and emotional data.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we just sort of question how subjective that data is. The only I think probably the more valid assessment that we have and use right now is the pair data in grades 6 through 10. There is some interest, at least from one school, of pulling that pair assessment down into 5th grade so that in a transition year, we can really be thoughtful about that data. And then 6th grade would have that as students are making the transition. So that's definitely been a conversation. Oh my God. Oh, Brad.
The new addition to the family. How freakishly cute is that dog?
Oh, awesome.
Oh my God.
That's awesome.
What coloring? Oh my, look at her face.
Voting member.
There we go.
Just get back from
my
in town. Sorry about that distraction.
All right.
No, don't be sorry about that. You know.
Yeah.
But Stephanie, we'll have to get them together for play dates, our pups.
Oh yeah, love it. She'll love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that needs to be a conversation that maybe continues.
Oh, there's another dog. Sorry.
Oh yeah. I think we could use, we need something that measures culture. I'm just not sure, what the right answer for that is. But I will tell you, I connected with, there's a new person at the state. Her name's Stacy Barker, maybe. It's a brand new position out of school safety, but it's under the school safety umbrella, but she is specific. She has a specific focus around schools moving to more of a restorative nature and working on those culture pieces, working on relationship building, and not just students, but whole school culture. I think that that's definitely something that we need to focus on for middle school and high school. I think as a result of the pandemic and the hybrid model and students coming back and seeing a lot of behaviors the past year at both schools, I think we've identified that we definitely need to work on that culture piece. And this woman is new to her role, but she's very open to working with us. There's no financial commitment to the partnership. I think she's got some good ideas, so I'll definitely be running that by our 6 through 12 admin team. But I think we recognize that we really need to invest in the relationship building and invest in the restorative response. And with the new student code of conduct, it's a requirement that restorative language be part of our student code of conduct. So we want to make sure that we're preparing our staff for that and preparing our students for that.
Yeah, I totally love that perspective of being able to track that. My hunch is, and of course I don't have any data to back this up, but my hunch is if we're able to do better in these other SEL goals, that we will also do better in the academic ones.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Because if we're able to make the school a really safe, inclusive, engaging place for every student, then those academic goals are going to skyrocket from there. So,
yeah.
So anything we can do to track that data, as Lauren suggested, and I'm a firm believer in that. And then, following up on the same line of logic, thinking about ways that we can create these successful models that can be shared across the district.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Good. Okay, good.
I just want to add really quickly, because you guys may have seen it on Facebook. I think John shared it with the board as well, that on June 22nd, Pete drove a bus and the admin team boarded a bus, and we went around to the community, as Jesse had talked about last time, about developing, partnerships and pathways. We're starting that work. It was really successful. It was a great day. Administrators had some really great takeaways about opportunities that are out there for our students that we don't even know about them as administrators and, as educators. So we need to be informed so that we can help inform our students. And there's great entry-level positions out there that require no college. And then there's great positions out there in our own community that, students get a 4-year degree and can come right back to their hometown if this is where they want to be. So it was exciting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great. I'm sorry I didn't respond to that email, but that is fantastic. It's fantastic. Yep.
So I think we're taking July off. No meeting in July. I mean, we're not taking July off, but there'll be no meeting.
No meetings in July. No. No.
Yeah.
We all need a bit of a break from all this stuff. So it's good to get a break.
So we'll connect again about a date in August to reconvene.
Yeah. Okay.
Sound good?
All right. Thanks for all your hard work.
All right.
Continued great stuff.
Awesome.
Are we still meeting, Lauren?
Yeah.
Afterwards? Okay, so I'll just stay on.
Stay on. Yep. Yep.
All right.
All right. Stephanie and Bruce, have a good day.
Thank
You'll
you.
have to make me the
Have some
host, Stephanie.
Thank you.
I can do that, John. Let's see.
Yeah.
Make
Stop the
host.
recording.
I will stop the recording.
Yeah.
Oh, John, actually, you need to stop the recording because I just made you the host. Can you pop?
There we go.